our special meeting of our Civic Center Advisory Committee on November 6th at 4 p.m.
Here comes Rick right now.
Oh, okay.
Do we have agendas here?
No.
Do we have
Yeah,
to put- Oh, I missed it.
They're up
That's right.
there.
I thought, I didn't hear it.
But does it have the minutes on it? Last
Congratulations.
week's meeting?
Congratulations.
Are you
Steve,
passing?
do you have any ones?
I
Yeah.
don't hear it, Greg. I
Got 'em.
got Steve. They're all the same.
There's one for 4 o'clock and one for 5 o'clock.
Is it, are there minutes in there?
4.
I know.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you, but I.
You got the 4 o'clock stack. And
Yeah,
then
I
I'll come
thought-
back,
I
I'll
had
come with the
agendas.
5 o'clock
I
now.
have the agendas, but I don't have
Do I have the stack you got?
Okay, all right, so we're just calling the meeting to order, and now that we have, I'll do the roll call. Do you want to do the roll call?
yeah, you don't have this one.
DeGoya,
I'd love to be taken care of.
You're here.
Yes.
Joestar,
I have that.
Here,
Fisher,
You're here.
Oh, here.
Here,
I didn't
Lively,
Here.
Merridew,
Here.
Tonelli,
Maybe coming,
Dobby,
excuse,
Lewis.
and I'm here, okay. And then we have our staff.
We have a lot of staff in here.
Okay, city manager Rodriguez, Chief Flynn, public works director Seabird, and I don't think our library, Tom Fortin is here. So, do we have any members of the public who'd like to speak? I see no members of the public, consultants, so we'll move on. We did not receive the minutes for October 22nd, so there's not going to be a approval of the October 22nd, meeting. So we're going to push that to our next meeting. So in our regular agenda, the reason that we wanted to have a meeting before our joint council meeting is to coordinate with our consultants, what we're going to present and how we're going to present this to the council at 5 o'clock, and have more discussion with our committee, as well as get a report from our ad hoc committee about the police department analysis, okay? So we have our consultants here, and so if you could kind of maybe walk us through what you're planning on presenting. We'd like to get input from every committee member as to, their impressions of what the outreach meetings have meant to them, and take that to they've
So, in general, what this presentation has in it is, it has an overview of our process to date, what we've accomplished. It has imagery from the initial public workshop, some of the things that came out of that. Then it goes into showing the options that were developed. It captures some imagery from the outreach meetings, and then each outreach meeting shows its graphic recording with notes of the key themes from each of the meetings. And then I've summarized a synthesis at the end of what we think we've gotten out of as kind of a culmination of all the meetings held so far. And then there's a couple slides of next steps that describe the next steps in our process. So if you'd like, I can just skim through that real quick until we get to the point of the outreach meetings. We can go through those one at a time to sort of compare notes and then get to our synthesis, if that makes sense.
Okay, does that make sense to you?
Okay, so I'm
Let me
just,
ask one question,
Yes.
if I may, just to understand what the difference is that you're going to be presenting here now versus at the 5 o'clock meeting today.
okay, so I'm gonna run you guys through real fast and not talk about any of the first, 15 slides. But we'll talk more, and then what I wanna find out from you is, should I take out some of those slides to summarize the last half even further and really get more to the conclusion? So I'm gonna look for some input on how
So
much
you're
I
going to
should.
bounce some things off of us
Exactly,
in preparation for the
yeah,
next
so I just wanna see,
Okay.
should I even cut down the presentation further and keep it higher level?
Okay.
So that's what I wanna get from you guys, and also, if you agree with my synthesis, and if it makes sense so far, barring anything different you hear on Friday, that sounds like the right direction.
Okay, just one other comment. I'd like to make sure in the agenda, we just reserve some room to be able to give the committee some guidance for Friday.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask you about that as well today, and what I thought is we can discuss a little bit, and then I can kind of send you, tomorrow I can kind of work on sort of whatever you need, outline, some imagery or notes, so we can get that prepped for you tomorrow, so you have a cheat sheet as well.
Great,
And then we
Okay.
need to figure out who else is going to ask.
right.
Okay?
Okay.
Madam Chair, before Cheryl gets started, it's important to remember though that at 5 o'clock, there are 2 members of the council that haven't been through any of this at all. So,
Okay, so I'm just gonna whiz through these so you can see, the sequence of how I'm gonna discuss with council what we've been doing. So that's the agenda I'll share with them. And then here we go. Most of you have seen a lot of these slides before. This is a summary of what we've done to date. And then just going through imagery, public workshop imagery, our analysis that led up to our option. So we'll explain each option to council that we developed, just as we did at the outreach meetings. Let them know the kinds of questions we asked and tested, what led to some of the discussion in the meetings. And then here we are at the meetings. I just combined images together onto a couple slides of all the different homes that we had meetings in. And then here we go one by one. So see, it's very fast, but I'll be talking more for the council to bring them up to speed. Okay, so starting with the meeting at Steve's house on the 28th, this was the recording from it. And then these are some of the themes that I took away, and thanks to Steve and Rick in particular for their notes after this meeting, as some of the key themes. So, I've broken them into buildings, streets and parking, and then the green space in each of the summaries. So they're all set up the same way. So in the first meeting, these are the themes. Can you guys read them okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so, in general, those were the preferences on the buildings, 2 stories, some consolidation okay. That group did not have a strong feeling about preserving the town hall building either way, and also no strong feeling about the public works yard, but if it stayed, it should be located near Fair Oaks. Streets and parking, there was support for underground parking. There was a very strong opinion that there should be a street connecting Maple with Fair Oaks. Lots of groups, each night you'll see, ask the question about the contractor parking practices and the train parking. That came up frequently. And then that group expressed a general preference for option 2 because of the pedestrian central square type space. Thought of Fair Oaks as the front door, thought that you could approach it from the side, again, to favor option 2. Nobody had a strong feeling about a playground or play structures on site. They just thought that the green space, as it is resolved and designed, it should have interest and variation and whatnot. Some of the group did not prioritize maximizing preservation of heritage trees. They thought some tree removal was acceptable. Others thought it was very important. So that was the first meeting. Then we went to Elizabeth's house.
Oh, can I just add one thing?
Yes.
It was very consistent.
Yes, it was very consistent.
99% agreement.
Yeah.
At that meeting.
Exactly, you're
Yeah.
right. That one was very consistent. There weren't a lot of opposing sort of outliers. So then at Elizabeth's house, this was the recording from that meeting. And again, increased density, 2-story buildings preferred for that reason. About half the group, though, in that meeting really liked the whole single building approach to even increase density further. Strong feeling in that group for preserving the town hall building, comfortable repurposing it. That group preferred the public works yard off-site, but they were concerned about the impact to park if it was moved over there and combined with that yard. Again, support for underground parking, but primarily see it for staff and secure parking. Again, strong opinion for the street connection, and that group almost unanimously gravitated toward option 3. I think because of the street connections is mostly what they liked about it. Again, the same question about train parking and overall amount of parking provided and contractor parking practices. They had a general consensus around maximizing the green space or the park space. They didn't have any strong feelings about play areas, just program it successfully. They had a very high priority at this meeting for maximizing the preservation of heritage trees. And they also expressed concerns because this site is gonna, you approach it from many different vantage points, to be aware of how you're treating backdoor functions. Because they will have to be screened, they will be visible on a property in a site like this. So, does that sound about right for those who attended that meeting?
The only sort of different spin that I had is your point, general consensus about maximizing green park space was right, and what I had was that nobody was opposed to underground parking.
Right, yeah, I could
So
make
you
that.
kind of, those two kind of go together.
Yeah, support for underground parking. I could make that just more of a unanimous consensus. Okay, the next meeting was at the Schroeder residence. In this meeting, again, similar feelings about buildings and building consolidation. That group seemed to lean more toward not having it all in one building. Again, strong feeling to preserve the town hall, and a statement that they didn't feel it was appropriate to continue as council chambers. This group brought up the notion that they felt, well, if you want to move it, that's okay with us. So that was the first time we never asked that question, and that was the first time it was brought up. Again, strong preference for getting the public works yard off of this site, but they nodded to staff and saying, but we want to know what staff think.
And at that meeting, you were very clear that moving the public works yard off this site meant moving it to the park
Exactly.
rather than just somewhere else.
Exactly, we started making sure that we were getting out ahead of that point and making that clear from the first mention of that idea, as the meetings went on. So, every group understood that that was the choice. This group, there were a few people that had some concerns about moving it to the park, and they felt that they didn't have enough information to answer that question.
Right.
Again, support for underground parking. Again, it's, this group raised the notion, well, only if it's affordable.
Right.
So that came up. They all supported it, but it was like, well, but we don't want it to kill the project if we can't afford underground parking. Again, strong feeling for the street connection between Maple and Fair Oaks. About a third to a half of this group liked option 3 for its street arrangement again. People started bringing up that they didn't want to have to, as Ashfield goes through, be forced out onto Fair Oaks if they really wanted to go the opposite direction toward Maple. They didn't want to have to go off-site to turn around and go back the other direction. And the option 3 gives you the choice to basically tee into Station Road and go either way. So I think as we started listening to why people liked option 3 and started asking more deeply, I think that was a common theme of why they liked option 3, because nobody specifically said we love streets going through the pedestrian area. They didn't like that so much. They liked convenience, and they liked that Ashfield intersects and you can go either way. So that started to be what was really, the key of option 3 that people seemed to respond to.
I think also the one story.
Yeah.
That came up last night.
Yeah, the mix of 1-story and 2-story,
Yeah.
and that option 3 kept the library 1-story.
Right.
Nobody seemed to mind
Yeah.
police and admin and building and planning being captured in a 2-story building. Lots of people wanted the library separate, and lots of people liked it staying 1-story. Then this group, again, same questions about train parking and contractor parking policies. Again, aside from the comments about option 3 in the streets, which, quite a bit of the group felt were important, they did again gravitate toward option 2, and that somebody characterized the bucolic feeling to the site, and, making it dignified, making the green space, pleasant and a good experience. They recognize that there might be 2 front doors, both Fair Oaks and Ashfield, and so therefore liked creating the pedestrian center. A lot of them felt that in the green space, there should be no reason to duplicate functions at Holbrook Park, that it really should be something that enhances the civic center itself and the functions that are placed there. It shouldn't duplicate and try and be another park for the town. Again, maximize the preservation of heritage trees was important to the group. They are okay with some judicious tree removal. And then they brought up wanting to preserve the existing street lamps that are here on the site. They had a real fondness for that. They felt that they were special. They really gave a character to the site that they want to maintain. So that's the first time we heard. That's the only group that brought that up, right?
Last night
Somebody brought it up
the
too.
lighting was a big issue.
Oh,
Madam
okay.
Chair.
Yes.
Cheryl, as you go through these, it might be helpful to, in addition to identifying Schroeder residents, verbally note, this is West Atherton or
Oh, yeah,
Central
so
Atherton.
you guys might have to, you might
Okay,
have to
well,
help me.
yeah.
Yeah.
Identify that.
Because that
Yeah.
might come into play. when
I know
you see
this
them
was a
tomorrow.
neighborhood group legally around the site.
They will, but clearly the issue with streetlights came up because this group walks through the
Right,
site.
right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well, and last night it
Yeah.
came up because Lindenwood is so dark.
dark,
Right.
But
yeah.
there were a lot of booing and hissing with that lady saying that.
Yeah, I know,
People
but.
that live there like it that way.
Did they say, don't duplicate, did they say what they would do? Don't duplicate the park,
The
but
whole
what would you
bucolic
do?
statement started to describe what they would do is they want it to be a pleasant green space for walking through, for sitting, for, feeling like it supports the functions there while you're there visiting the civic center. But they didn't want, recreation yards,
Right.
playgrounds, they didn't want to duplicate any of those. They didn't see it as like holding like a wedding or kind of a big outdoor event like that. They said, oh, we got the park for that.
Mhm.
So that was sort of their thoughts.
Yeah, and they just didn't want to dedicate it to a child's playground.
Right, they
I
really
think
didn't
that's,
want,
with
a child's
with
playground.
equipment or sandboxes or
Yeah.
swings
they
and
didn't
stuff like
see
that.
any reason to duplicate those kinds of functions at the site.
Okay.
So then,
Nashon.
the next meeting, there were some interesting comments brought up by this group that were a little different than others. Again, I think the two-story buildings, increased density, was preferred. But there was, I think, a pretty strong contention at that meeting that the single building approach, due to its economy and efficiency, really has some merit. And there were some that felt pretty strongly about that. Others in the group felt that the library should be its own building. There was, again, agreement around preserving the existing town hall building and repurposing it. But many felt that it was also acceptable just to preserve the facade or a portion of it, make it the library entrance, somehow, integrate it into a new building. They didn't necessarily feel like you had to save this entire building and repurpose it.
Mhm.
They were okay with sort of that facade preservation notion. They really felt that staff should be the ones to determine the best location for the public works yard and what works most efficiently for the city. They didn't really feel like they should dictate that. They, again, supported underground parking for staff and secure parking to reduce surface parking, again, if affordable. They feel that the street connection is critical. They feel that, again, they picked up on the idea of Ashfield being able to have the choice to go in both directions. They prefer more of a park feel to the site, and so therefore preferred option 2's sort of central pedestrian green space. Didn't like streets to circulate through the center of the site. They thought Fair Oaks was the front door, but they could see a successful approach from the perimeter and walking into the center.
Well, wasn't this the group that brought up the whole atrium concept in that sort of?
Yep. They could, and so that's why this group could, that's why I think this group was more divided on one building versus two buildings, that they could see, a well-done atrium and placement of building, kind of also serving that notion of a center pedestrian area, indoor spilling to outdoor. So they felt like there could be a successful resolution with either one building or two buildings. They didn't feel it was appropriate to spend effort or dollars on creating a major gathering space or park spaces. This was another group that felt that the primary purpose of the Civic Center is to provide a dignified location for city services, places for, they got into the notion of places for community groups to meet, indoor or outdoor, where there currently aren't any other venues serving those needs, like various committees, Boy Scout groups.
Jamie Noshheim is on the board of the tech center. Right?
Yeah, so
And-
she used that example
Yeah,
and
and-
talked about what they're doing.
How there's 10,000 organizations out there that are looking for meeting spaces.
Maybe you don't have
And-
10,000, but.
And like even knitting clubs or people that don't have a place to meet, that, need places to meet, so kind of providing that as a place to, for those organizations to meet and then bring it into a community.
Mhm. So there seemed to be some recognition that this could serve that purpose, and it would be a nice thing to provide if, there were some meeting rooms being provided that could be open to the community and were located appropriately for public access, off hours, off regular business hours. they, they really did feel though that, the town already has other venues that provide park and recreation and large meeting gathering spaces, so they didn't see a need to duplicate that here. Again, they also felt the preservation of heritage trees is important, but it shouldn't compromise the ability to achieve the best plan. Any removal should be carefully considered along with the placement of trees, but they really just said, we should just comply with the town of Atherton's requirements for tree removal and protection of heritage trees. And why would this be any different than what any resident has to comply with? And we just stick with that, we're good. So they really felt like, well, why don't we just go by the rules? And that's how we should approach this. We shouldn't try and dictate something different in either direction. So I appreciated that comment.
There's also a lot of discussion about coffee.
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of discussion about coffee and food. I should note that, there was.
And, maybe having a place for Friends of the Library to sell their books and gifts and things and have coffee. So, that didn't get on your.
Yeah, I'll have to add that. But it was funny though too, because there was quite a lot of commentary about how as a business venture, probably couldn't get anyone interested because they couldn't make enough money to make it viable and would never want to own and operate it as the town. So there was also the opposing viewpoint brought up as, in terms of a viable commercial enterprise, it's probably never going to be that because it's never going to get the traffic. And then there were people who disagreed with that comment. So I think.
Especially if the train.
Especially, right, exactly.
If we got more service from the train center, so
you
have to look at it as a business model.
Yeah, so I'll get that comment in there because I forgot to put that in, but that was actually a big point of discussion for a bit of that time. Okay, so then there's, Matthew, maybe you should go through this one.
Since you were there.
I understand that was challenging.
It was a good one.
There was a lot of good discussion.
Engaged group.
Yes, very engaged group.
Yeah.
Sounds
There were
like.
about, 17,
18.
Wow.
18 people there?
Big
Okay.
group too.
Yeah.
Big group.
They took it.
So, we got obviously got a lot of discussion last night, and the takeaways I got from it was that we very judiciously went through the checklist and made sure we went through that and had everyone vote on that, and that was kind of a laborious task, but we got our homework done. And there was a lot of questions about details, about, do we have a cost estimate, do we have floor plans yet? How are we gonna pay for this? Do we even need a library? That topic came up too. And then, so basically the takeaways I got last night, there was a preference for a mix of 1- and 2-story buildings. They enjoyed that. The consolidation of the uses was fine. And there was no real strong consensus about town hall. What should happen with it? Do we need to preserve it? Do we incorporate it? Some people felt very strongly about incorporating it. They came up to me afterwards at the end of the meeting and said, it can be part of the library. You think an adaptive reuse is a really sensitive thing to do. And they also emphasized that we could use, if it's part of the library, we can use the library funds to restore it. So that there's some cost efficiencies in doing that. Public work yard, unless I misinterpreted it, didn't seem to be any strong passion in either direction about
They essentially said the same thing about, it's really up to staff, to whatever the efficiencies of staff needed. And if it was to stay on the Civic Center site, that it would be screened.
Yeah, it didn't elicit much discussion. And when we asked them to vote, there was strong support for underground parking. There were strong opinions that against.
Yes.
And it was mainly for people the public didn't want to use it.
Right.
They supported, we had to drill down and really understand, to figure out exactly what they liked and didn't like about parking. But underground parking for the police and for staff, all for it. But surface parking for the public coming in there, and there were several elderly people there, and they felt strongly that providing surface parking was much more convenient and accessible.
Especially convenient surface parking close by the post office or, city hall, so that they could, ingress and egress,
Yeah.
get in and out.
There was a very strong consensus and agreement once again for the connection between Maple and Fair Oaks. That we should provide some to that. They supported Ashfield connecting over to Fair Oaks. And they didn't really say anything about getting it back over to Maple and that through connection. But at the end of the meeting, one woman who did vote for option number 3, who lives right over here, came over and she was very passionate about Ashfield connecting over to Maple, because she said, I'm gonna have to drive all the way around like this. If we're on Ashfield, we're really stranded. And that came up also in the traffic report, because you look at El Camino, and if you're coming off of Ashfield, making a left turn movement, particularly during rush hour, peak hour, it's, you're not gonna make it. So you'd have to come up Ashfield, down Fair Oaks, and go back up to Middlefield to get out. Next. The contractor parking came up, but that wasn't really a big issue. Convenience of parking was really important, and then the train parking actually was a lot of discussion too. And what we should do about that, should we accommodate it, how much do we have to provide, what happens if train service increases, are we gonna have to change our site plan, are we preparing for that? What if train service, nothing ever happens with train service, can we just make it all green right there? Definitely, they clearly preferred option 2 with the central green space. There was only one vote for option number 3, and there were a few votes, probably like 5 votes for option number 1. That people seem to feel that the people who came up to me after the end talking about option 1 really got the idea that you just put one building in and you leave the rest of the park. That was, they understood the simplicity of that. The idea of a front door, once again, was encouraged a lot of discourse and discussion about what exactly the front door was. It's actually a front door to the building, and so we had to kind of backtrack and talk about the idea of whether we were saying it's a gateway.
Right.
And the discussion came up, well, is it a gateway like Lindenwood? Very ceremonial and
They
grand.
understood that.
Yeah, they understood that. When I explained it in those terms, I'm trying to talk about Stanford University and the oval and the quad and coming in, that didn't quite resonate, but Lindenwood did. So they supported some type of gateway. Playground, indifferent. And the trees, once again, they were like everybody else. We should follow the city's rules, preserve them, but let's not go crazy. If we have to take some down to achieve the plan, let's not go overboard.
Okay. So then I tried to.
Excuse me, can I just swing back for a moment to the meeting that we had on Vernon, yeah.
The 30th, the
Right.
Schroeder.
At Schroeder. There was one thing that I thought was important about that we didn't touch on, and nobody else seemed to, and that was the concept of, they wanted to keep the existing town hall building,
Right.
but they felt very strongly that it could be picked up and moved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It already has.
I got that.
Do we have that?
Yeah.
Because that has a huge.
They were the
impact.
first ones that mentioned it, that it could be moved.
Okay. That
And
wasn't
Steve?
that.
The other thing I would mention, because I think it may end up being a compromise to get 2 and 3 both solved, is people were fine putting the library together with city administration.
Yeah, and actually, I remember that I need to go back and capture that in the meeting at your house, because they did specifically say that, and I think they said it again one of the next 2 meetings too.
And let me tell you why I'm bringing it up. Nobody wants the street to run through the middle of our park-like setting. But everybody wants Ashfield to run through, not everybody, many people want it to run through to Station Lane.
Yeah,
So a compromise would be have it jog over, put the police station at that end, Station Lane, Ashfield goes through, and City Hall, Town Administration, and Library are together in the park in a park-like setting. Because kids aren't gonna run over to the police station probably, you know, with their books. So that's,
Except they're looking for their card, their, their collection cards.
well, they might, but maybe we'll have but I'm just saying that,
Yeah.
you may end up with a compromise there.
Right, okay, so I'll make
Whereas
sure I get that
The bulk,
into.
2/3 of the need is together in a park,
Mhm.
and the police are across the street.
Yeah, I think in general, there wasn't a strong feeling of how things should be mixed and matched if we did a combination of 2 and 1-story buildings. It's whatever is most practical. People could see admin and library being together or admin and police being together. What was important is that all the library functions were on a single floor. And that many people preferred that the library was off on the park area, you know, itself. You know, whether city admin was above it or not, nobody seemed to really have a strong preference. They thought that was fine, but they really wanted, you know, a lot of people really wanted the 2 separate buildings unless they were on the efficiency train and really wanted, you know, to capture the efficiency of a single footprint. And in the single footprint, I think even those that wanted the library separate could envision how it could work in the single building footprint. I think a lot of people did agree, even if they didn't like one whole building, that they could imagine that the library could still be successful if on a ground floor, if connected to outdoor space, et cetera, et cetera.
The other thing that came up that I heard you say from another meeting and from me and my house was people were open to legitimate ways to take library funding and have it stretched a little further. So like you talked about repurposing this building.
Yep.
Somebody talked about, well, if we're gonna put a parking garage, let's make sure the library's over it so
Right.
they can share in that.
Contribute, yeah, exactly.
So that.
But
that
people were
was-
very open to
also
that. Let's
last
be
night,
fair,
people
but
said-
let's find a
people
way.
said,
Yeah.
Last night,
Yeah.
a lot of people said the same.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of good
Um,
comments of people
about
being
that.
sensitive to how to get, you know, the best efficiency out of how to spend the funds. I think once people understood how the funds, you know, in hand were set up and how money had to be raised, you know, people were really trying to think about ideas of how to maximize potential, so.
Yeah, and truly, throughout all of the 5 meetings, cost kept coming up,
Yep.
you know, how much is this gonna cost? What's the square footage, you know, how is this gonna be paid? And so I've always had to get up and explain the situation, and then they go, oh, well, okay, so, you know, the library, and the one question we got last night was, why do we even
Show me the money.
well, yeah, for sure. Well, so what we're gonna have to do, and I think this is something we're gonna address later in our meeting, is that we need to really put a sharp pencil to the square footage numbers of the police department and admin and public works. I mean, the library subcommittee here did a great job of figuring out the library square footage, but that was a direction from council to do that. And so before the consultants go off and make up, you know, cost estimates, we need to get direction from council to have staff work with us and the consultants to really verify and vet
Yes.
those
Yes.
Other facility
Yeah,
numbers.
pretty
square
soon here we'll
footages.
get dead in the water if we
Okay,
can't come to
so I think
conclusion.
that's, you know, one of our next.
That's on my next
The
steps.
other thing that was really surprising, even though people talked about the train parking, they never really said anything about, well, citing this building that you've got on the plan is too close to the train tracks, and what about high-speed rail, and the reverberation, and the sound, and everything, and, you know, you have to take that into consideration. Nobody in all 5 meetings ever said anything like that about it. But I did get a call from a resident this morning who wanted me to make sure that I said something to our committee and to the consultants about that, you can guess who that is, but, you know, that we need to make sure that, you know, when we cite these buildings, that we do it thoughtfully in light of not only having the existing train there, but the electrified train, and the potential of having a high-speed rail train in Northern Ireland. Okay? Anybody have comments about that?
I think that was always in our thoughts.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's only going to get better than it is today.
Oh, yeah.
These are old buildings with single pane glass and, you know,
No, I mean, the building itself can be.
Soundproof.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
there
it will
was-
be soundproof when the
And I
time
think
comes.
there was
for
somebody who came up to us
construction.
maybe after one of the meetings who was, you know, suggesting ways to you know, maybe you site the buildings a little bit differently with their backs to the station so that the outdoors, you've got at least a portion of that outdoor space in the middle,
Kind of
you know,
protected.
shielded by the building or some of the building, which, you know, I think the way we have option two right now, because we were saving clusters of trees, is almost like an amphitheater effect to the track. So I think that part of our refinement, when we get down to this final solution, will be, you know, how do you sort of craft building locations so that you have some protected spaces if you're gonna create some more intimate outdoor courtyard type spaces. Okay,
This is
so
yours and-
trying to synthesize everything we learned. So I think there was a strong consensus in general for 2 stories. I think the majority felt that there should be 2 buildings, or at least the library should be off and separate somehow, you know, from, or just getting away from a single building. But, you know, I'm sort of torn because I felt like in every meeting, there were enough proponents of a single building for many very good reasons, that maybe as we're refining this final option, we still hold a sub-option that tries to see if a single building could work. So that's one question for all of you.
Let me respond to that, because I kind of viewed that differently. I thought that the most common was having the library positioned right over here next to this building. But there was a tenant that I interpreted for it to be separate in the same complex, but connected by an atrium, rather than connected as a single building. If you could imagine, you know, some kind of connectivity that isn't a building connection, but is a structural connection. And if we were to put underground I don't know if we have to put underground parking under the library in order to get the library funds to pay for that. That's a valid thing that we need to talk to the county about. But if we do have to put the parking under the library, if we want library funds to pay for it, then I don't see how we put the library over here, because everything I heard from you guys was underground parking really doesn't work over here.
Well, if you're gonna save any of these trees, you're gonna destroy them, so you.
So that's an
mess up the
interesting
roots.
point that we need to think about.
Well, I guess the question comes up is, first, the county, JPA will ask, well, how many parking spaces is required for the library that you're building? X number. And I don't know what that number is.
But the sway factor is going to be